All right, dear guests, dear panelists, dear friends and partners from the Center for Geopolitics, it is a very great pleasure to welcome you to the last panel of today's very insightful conference. Congratulations for making it that far. I promise it will be a very, very insightful and interesting panel because we will deal with the so what question, the question of what follows from all those interesting discussions that we had so far. What are the conclusions? What are the practical steps that we take from here, where we are now? And I'm Michael Martin Richter. I'm the UK country director of the Seidel Foundation. We are a political foundation from Germany, which operates in over 70 countries, out of 60 offices all around the world. And what we do in each country is very much influence what is relevant for the bilateral relations that you have with each country. So in the case of the UK, it's very much about what dominates UK-German, but also UK-European relations. And I guess it is needless to say that the topic we are covering today is highly, highly relevant, it's highly timely, and also the panel here with the so what question is very important because on the one hand, it's important to talk about the present, about the past, but it's also very important to talk about the future. And what we do out of the future depends, of course, very much on what assessment of the threat we make. We have seen it very nicely during the first panel, where you have seen a presentation where the risk we have something depends not only on our capabilities, but also how we assess a certain threat. So besides being UK country director here for the Seidel Foundation in the UK, I'm also German-Polish by background. And I think there's hardly any other issue, any other area where the bilateral relations or the bilateral perceptions between Germany and Poland have been historically so divergent, or since I can think, I was born in the mid-1990s, so divergent as the perception of Russia. What is Russia? What do we do with Russia? How do you engage with Russia? So just to give you a very small anecdote, because I think it's a very nice kind of frame around the discussion. In the 1990s, Boris Yeltsin, president of Russia, end of history idea that was floating around. A great idea of Wandel durch Handel, Wandel durch Annäherung, this idea that Russia will become much more similar to us if we trade with them, if we approximate with Russia, if we engage with Russia. Lech Wałęsa, the first president of post-Cold War Poland, famously said, you know, negotiating with Russia, it's like Russia has a pen in one hand and who knows what in the other? A grenade. And today we know this assessment was wrong because Russia does not hold a pen in one hand, it does not hold a grenade in the other, it holds two grenades in both hands, and if it could, it would hold 5 grenades in each hand. This is what we have to know. So I think a very nice symbol of this end of history narrative in Germany was the fact that many shelters were repurposed. Many civilian shelters were turned into techno bunkers. Don't get me wrong, Germany is well known for its techno culture, especially Berlin. I think it's great that there are techno bunkers, but not necessarily civilian shelter bunkers that will be repurposed to such things, or data centers. However, since 2022, we see a very strong approximation of the public discourse between Germany and Poland, but also between Germany and the Baltic states about the threat perception. Who is Russia? What do we do with Russia? Now in Germany, it's suddenly acceptable to talk about the fact that we have to be war ready, which is a huge paradigm shift. It's the Zeitenwende that floats around so often. And the question now is, but where do we go from here and how can we do better? Is what we are doing already enough? And I'm very, very glad that we have a panel which is highly diverse in terms of the geographical area that they cover. However, it's not diverse in terms of quality because all of them are very, very renowned, remarkable scholars, academics, think tank representatives, and politicians. So without further ado, I will just introduce very briefly all 3 panelists at the same time, and then I will pose a lead question to each of them, and then probably a follow-up question. But then, of course, the most important thing is that we are here in a dialogue, that I give the floor to you. So on the very left, we have Dr. Mantas Adomėnas. He is the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies and a former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. He served in the Lithuanian parliament from 2008 until 2020. He focused on democracy support, foreign affairs, national security, and education. He has participated in international election observation missions and is a member of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Adomėnas, he is a personification of from Vilnius to Cambridge because he holds a PhD from Cambridge University, and he's also an accomplished scholar and writer. Now, next to me, we have Dr. Kai-Olaf, and he's a personification of from Berlin to Tallinn, so the opposite of our title today. So Dr. Lang, he's a senior fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, or as known in Germany, Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, SWP. He's based in Berlin, but he is probably one of Germany's most renowned experts on the Baltic countries and Central and Eastern Europe, as well as EU enlargement policy. Dr. Lang holds a doctorate in political science and has an extensive background in research and policy analysis, with a focus on European security and integration. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Viktoria Vdovychenko. She is joint program leader in the Future of Ukraine project at the Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. With nearly 15 years of experience in policy analysis, leadership development, and capacity building, her research focuses on hybrid warfare, strategic communication, and Euro-Atlantic integration. She has held academic and advisory roles in Ukraine and across Europe, and has a recognized voice on Ukraine's security and resilience. So it's also a great pleasure to have all of you here, and I think it's going to be a very, very insightful panel. So starting with you, Dr. Mantas Adomėnas, I would like to start with a quote from Ursula von der Leyen, which she gave in a speech shortly after the large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And she was speaking as the president of the European Commission, but I think she was also speaking as the former German defense minister. And she said, "We should have listened to the voices inside our union, in Poland, in the Baltics, and all across Central and Eastern Europe. They have been telling us for years that Putin would not stop, and they acted accordingly." So, dear Dr. Adomėnas, tell us, as a representative of the Baltic states, do you feel that your voice is being heard now much, much more stronger within the Union? And tell us, what role should, can, and will the Baltic states play as role models in civil defense and preparedness for other European countries? And in which area should this role be most pronounced due to A, the capacities of the Baltic countries, but also B, the urgent needs for actions? Please give us a few examples, if you can.
Thank you. Well, I shall start with a slight preamble that my claim to being here is not academic. I am an academic, but my academic specialization is classics. So on Mondays, I teach Roman imperial literature, which is very apropos because, as you know, sort of Caligula famously exclaimed a line which could suit Putin very well. You know, so when he heard that his brother was taking antidotes in preparation to potential poisoning, he said that, "What? Antidotes against the emperor?" So antidote was conceived as an act of aggression, I think, which is very sort of, appropriate when we're talking about invasion of Ukraine. Right, so if I have any claim to be here, it's first because Lithuania has the longest track record of dealing with Moscow, well before Poland, since the 14th century. And we've seen all the tricks in these centuries, and I calculated at one point the periods that we were not either at war, occupying each other, or preparing for war. And these were two periods. One was Yeltsin years, another was a sort of couple of decades in the mid-15th century when the daughter of the Lithuanian Grand Duke was married to a Moscow Grand Duke. And this was basically kind of, ruling the stuff. Other than that, as above. The other sort of claim to fame is that I was deputy minister, and at the time when we sort of, we had to undergo a very steep learning curve, precisely about this sort of, hybrid attacks. In my very first months, Belarus started bringing en masse migrants from Middle East, primarily Iraqi Kurds, and pushing them across the border to destabilize sort of Lithuania and Poland and to some extent Latvia. And so suddenly the almost 700-kilometer long, totally porous, totally unprotected border had to be fortified, measures had to be developed, to stop that. And I will not tell you because it's a different tale. But so hybrid attacks, even before the war started, was very much a feature of my tenure as deputy minister. And then the war started. Then we had to prepare shelters for not only sort of Ukrainians who were fleeing their country, but also find and safe shelter, protect from Russian potential assassination attacks. They're sort of Democrats who sought shelter in Lithuania. So I sat in a lot of briefings on how to interdict GRU plots, which was kind of brewing and which we received intelligence about. These are various episodes. I took very sort of deeply to heart the title Civil Preparedness and Defense in the Baltic Sea region. And the main body of what I'm going to tell is what Lithuania is doing in that respect, and then maybe with some lessons drawn from that. But before I go to that, I would like to share one sort of reminiscence, which relevance of which will transpire later. Last time I was in Ukraine before the war, I've been several times since, but before the war, was precisely a week before the invasion started. I was there to oversee our embassy evacuation procedures because we knew for a fact that it's going to start soon. And so I was sort of sent to see, is it prepared to be evacuated and all that. But it's not what I want to say, is that on the evening before the tour of the embassy, I was dining with one of my opposite numbers in the Ukrainian institutions and putting facts on the table, what we knew from Americans, what we knew from the Brits, and said, what are you doing to prepare for war? And the response was very sort of kind of irritable. He said, look, you are destroying our economy faster than Putin with all these sort of with all these dire prophecies. And after a while, sort of, he said, okay, just to put your mind at ease, when I go back home, I will oil my hunting rifle. Will you sleep easier now? And next morning, I was staying at the Hyatt Regency near St. Sophia Square. I came out early in the morning. Well, it was winter, so the sun was rising fairly late. So the sun was rising. Beautiful city, rays of sun glinting in the sort of domes of St. Michael's Monastery and all that. And I knew that the war was coming. I knew it was imminent. And yet it was so difficult for me to believe in the fact, looking at this absolutely sort of transcendent beauty of the city, that, this peace and beauty could be shattered, and that it will be shattered one day soon. And I think this psychology of status quo and inertia of status quo is something that we should bear in mind. Now, Lithuania's approach to civil preparedness and defense, which I will try to outline, started changing immediately after the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. A couple of years later, a new military doctrine was formulated and strategy, which sort of back to basics, kind of, enumerated three sources of defense for Lithuania. Well, first of all, Lithuania's army's own capability, then allies' contribution, which is, I think, very appropriate to mention today because tomorrow is going to be the inauguration of the 45th Armored Brigade of Germany in Vilnius. It's being officially deployed there in small numbers yet, but still. But the third pillar was society's participation in total defense, quite an important factor of deterrence. And for many years, this was just a statement in a sort of kind of military doctrine. Not much was done about it. However, in 2023, there was a civic resistance strategy formulated, which was immediately begun to be implemented. Obviously, sort of the second full-scale invasion was the trigger, and it specified four directions in which civil resistance has to be built. Two of them kind of active resistance measures, so societal resistance and societal resilience, so active resilience in sort of the view of all kinds of crises, but primarily bearing in mind sort of potential military invasion, but it it encompasses a very broad sort of spectrum of measures. So from websites called LT72.LT, 72 hours, 3 days survival immediately sort of after day X, which kind of tells what you have to do, sort of like grab money, water, whatever else, and head for the hills, to the sort of programs on how to recognize disinformation, how to recognize hostile approaches, how to even to recognize recruitment attempts by hostile intelligence agencies, as well as training sort of for basic medical skills, training for all sorts of resilience skills, which encompasses tens of thousands, and we're talking about a population of 2.8 million. So actually, this has been quite a broad sort of program of actions. Also, shelters. 72% of Lithuania is now provided with shelters, and Vilnius has 180% capacity, so you can have a choice of more and less stylish ones among the shelters. As well as other sort of, mostly educational programs, but the purpose of that direction is to build general societal resilience for all kinds of crises, so that in essence, people know what to do, and there are various KPIs, and constant polling to measure sort of how many people are there more people who know sort of how to respond to let's say sort of radioactive incident in the Belarusian nuclear power plant next to the Lithuanian border or not, compared to the previous one half a year ago. So that's the first direction, societal resilience. Second is called kind of mysteriously in a sort of Lithuanian jargon, strengthening will to resist. And that's mostly sort of educational activities directed at the young generation, which involve sort of special training, special education courses, not only on media literacy, but on civil defense, on military skills, sort of kind of basic military training in the schools. But what is, I think, historical memory, but I think what is important that it actually unites a whole framework of NGOs that do work with youth, which have sort of kind of membership, so from scouts to various other organizations, and kind of use them also as means of kind of disseminating the, making them part of that sort of educational process, whereby sort of people come out with much clearer sort of understanding of their identity, what they have to defend, why do they have to defend these grand-sounding concepts as Helia specified, freedom, democracy, and so on and so forth, and independence. So that's the second direction. And again, sort of quite a lot of fund has been poured into that. Two more directions are sort of more kind of narrowing concentric circles. So unarmed resistance, specific course, which has developed online modules, again, in several sort of deepening sort of specializations. So the most general course on unarmed resistance last year was taken by 33,000 people, with 2,000 and 3,000 people taking deeper and deeper sort of, so you know how to organize sort of, sit-ins, demonstrations, strikes, sabotage, and things like that. And the fourth direction is armed resistance. And here again, sort of, Lithuania relies on its historic experience, just as Armia Krajowa in Poland. Lithuania had a sort of unique, I think, among the sort of Baltic countries, and I think unique among the former Soviet occupied territories, except for Ukraine, prolonged armed resistance following the Second World War, which lasted from 44 till 56, so 3 times longer than actual war lasted in our territories. And here sort of the primary player is National Rifleman Union, who sort of it's a sort of paramilitary organization, which on the one sort of at one end of the spectrum ties into the army structures. So. But at the broader spectrum, it can be sort of, used for all kinds of activities, like it has detachments on facing cyber threats, developing sort of response to hybrid attacks, and drone operating capabilities, and others. So it's actually sort of, it's a huge funnel, 17,000 people. which at the sort of kind of sharpest end of the spectrum have 500 battle-prepared sort of riflemen who are integrated with military structures. That's to say, you know, and the aspiration is that actually sort of people move in that funnel towards battle preparedness. But they also have other functions, so it's a sort of umbrella network for integrating all sorts of functions that are interface between the kind of military and civilian needs and civilian support for the army. Other sort of measures that I should mention is development of military, I don't know how to translate it properly, maybe Donatas can help me, karinės komendaturos. Military commandants' offices, something like that. So it's a sort of the law has been sort of passed again, sort of following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's a structure which is meant to act as an intermediary between military command and civilian institutions, municipalities and other civilian institutions in wartime. So actually, it started enlisting people in the potential sort of kind of staff, so that there are people who know how to sort of, you know, organize. What is комендантский час?
Sorry.
Curfew. Sorry.
Curfew, yeah.
Yeah. Once you ask somebody, it immediately comes to you. Curfews, how to commandeer properties, how to sort of organize all sorts of support, how to close down roads and so on and so forth. So this is, again, sort of, this has been created. It has already a permanent staff and potential volunteers who will know their function at the sort of day X. Another sort of program which has had a considerable success is drone training for civilians. Again, that's following on the lessons of Ukraine. Again, the take-up is tens of thousands of people who are then narrowed down in specializations, and the best, of course, are integrated then with detachments of National Rifleman Union or with military formations, so that there is a reserve capability of people capable of sort of guiding drones into the targets. And I mentioned National Riflemen's Union, so this is something that existed a long time ago, but now it's finding its place in the sort of in the overall sort of civil defense structure. So in addition to the professional army and called up military, there is a sort of National Rifleman Union and Army Volunteer Corps. Army Volunteer Corps is an odd thing, and actually I had a bit of career there. I sometimes claim that my biggest sort of career step was that I served from junior private to private in the Army Volunteer Corps, but it's a sort of active, it's a sort of it's a reserve corps, 5,000 strong. Lithuanian army is 22,000 strong. So it's a considerable reserve of people who regularly, 30 days a year, attend training and have battle sort of component. Also, there is an expansion of call-up. Last year, there was almost 4,000 young men were called. But what is the cheering fact is that. Slightly contrary to the picture of Lithuania presented by my colleague, 98% of them are volunteered. That's to say, we have a obligatory but non-universal call-up. There is a lottery in a certain age group, or with exceptions for health, for studies, and so on and so forth. But since the start of that practice in 2015, again, a year is not a coincidence, since the introduction of obligatory call-up, the whole quota has been filled with people who volunteered, actually, sort of to serve. So there is no need for lottery, basically. I think what has been happening recently, there was this real sort of broadening of interaction between, on the one hand, civil and military sectors, on the other hand, public and private. So National Riflemen's Union, for example, has, just as this National Defense Center, training center, the elite institution, it has detachments which are composed, for example, from kind of startup businessmen, who sort of, you know, on the one hand, kind of use this organizational framework to organize collecting funds and buying drones and targeting lasers to Ukraine. On the other hand, they started developing military industry themselves, and this ecosystem has been created between this interface between Rifleman Union, kind of startup business, and NGOs. Right, so what this strategy has done, it actually created structure into which pre-existing elements, which were kind of, slightly oddball at one point, because, Army Volunteer Corps seems sort of an odd one out. Why is it needed? It was there historically, because actually Lithuanian Army started from the Volunteer Corps. And then sort of, it was never abolished because after the professional army was created, because it was there sort of at the beginning in 1990. So this strategy created structure into which all these elements could be fitted together in a kind of pyramid of, or funnel, whichever metaphor you prefer, of deepening engagement, and which creates a sort of various layers of interaction between society and military and state institutions. And it's nice to see that actually sort of lots of KPIs have been not only sort of fulfilled, but actually surpassed in this strategy. So actually the take-up by the society seems to be sort of, the demand is greater than the offer from the state institutions. And I think it's very important that these pre-existing elements have now been integrated into a unified structure. Now, going back to Kiev episode. A lot of measures that in the strategy that I sort of enumerated are sort of linked to training and to psychology and to bringing minds and hearts, as it were, on site. And I think that's very appropriate, because if this episode in Kiev teaches us anything, is that preparedness, that crisis may happen, and that actually that knowledge how to deal with it is a very important factor. Of course, it's very important to maintain balance, and I think a lot of psychological thinking has been going into how to maintain balance, and even though our discourse is securitized and militarized, but raising the profile of threat inordinately would scare people away, and sort of. But I think so far this has been managed to nicely. The different polling data says that Lithuanian young people up to 30 are the happiest in the world. So it couldn't be too bad. On the other hand, their sort of willingness to join army volunteers is huge, and actually is the youngest generation who are most ready in the polling to say that actually we are willing to defend our country with force of arms. Right, difficulties. No, I think sort of the one more lesson is, and I will end with that. We can come back to oh, actually, I ran out of time already. But I wanted to draw attention very briefly to the fact that the strategy has been kind of integrated into school curriculum. And I think this is has important implications. I think we are mistaken if we think that threats and civic resilience is a kind of passing phase which we now inject like a sort of antibiotic when there is a Russian threat, and then we can sort of kind of forget it. I think what we are at the threshold of is a new sort of very unpredictable phase of history, where actually this preparedness, resilience, the sort of fighting society, tough society, has to become the foundations on which democracies are built. We no longer have the luxury to be sort of, to continue the vacations from history. And in a sense, to create, to shape young people's mentality with the understanding that they might be called up to defend either actively or passively sort of the achievements of free society, and their sort of membership in EU and NATO should be, I think, part of all European curricula, not just in the frontline states. This is a sort of tectonic change, and we are here for the marathon, not for the sprint. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Adomėnas, thank you very, very much for your very insightful elaboration of that many initiatives that are happening in Lithuania. And as you highlighted quite a few times, much of it started in 2015 already. But of course, if you have a head start at a marathon, that's also good, right? It's better to start early than later. But now over to you, Dr. Lang. You have now heard an elaboration of different initiatives that are taking place in Lithuania, that are also integrated in the pyramids, that are even integrated into a school curriculum. Now, the question is, we mentioned 2015 a few times, maybe also for our international guests here, it's very interesting if when we look at Germany, because we focus very much on the Russian threat, which is very important, but when you're talking about civil defense or civil preparedness, in Germany, during the last election, not the ones now that took place in February, but the ones before in 2021, we had a very big event which happened just before the elections. And when you say this was the reason, actually, because something happened during a few things and a few processes that took place afterwards. But what happened was a huge flood in the Ahrtal in Germany. And what happened there? It turned out that Germany did not have, or large parts of Germany did not have a functioning warning system. And the population did not know what to do with it. So we had, I think, 197 deaths there. And many of those deaths could have been prevented had a functioning civil preparedness or civil defense or civil defense system being in place. So the whole story behind this is that also this whole process of Zeitenwende, of course, what happened then in 2020 played a huge role, but it also already happened a few months earlier. So the question is, however, now this came on top when we had then 2022 and the Zeitenwende, and we realized, okay, we need to do much, much more to be, and now I think it's really a paradigm shift when we say we need to be kriegstüchtig, war-ready or war-capable as a society, as an army, when talking about Germany, which would have been unthinkable even 2015. I think every minister of defense would have been, frowned upon in one way or another if he or she would have used those words. Now, Dr. Lang, looking at now the last elections in February 2025, a few months ago. We have now a new coalition which has been, we have a new chancellor which has been approved 2 weeks ago, of course with a few difficulties we did not anticipate before. But looking at what happened since 2021 and 2022, where we are today, what the new coalition plans, what it promises, do you think the German society, and I very much focus here on the word society, not just the army, but the society as a whole, because we are focusing on civil preparedness, civil defense, will it be war-ready, kriegstüchtig, by the end of the decade? And in which areas do you expect the biggest and the least progress up until then?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and also for making my job easier, because you really alluded that the German story is quite different from, for example, the Lithuanian or the one in the other Baltic states. Before trying to answer your highly relevant question, I would try to insert my thoughts a little bit, and also our panel a little bit in the broader context of the Baltic Sea region, where it stands. What has changed and which developments we have to reckon also in the next years. Second, then I would reflect a little bit on Germany, and thirdly, try to find some ideas about how to do it better than we did it before. Now, on the Baltic Sea region, I think there are three overarching tendencies, and some of them we already heard. But I think I try to rephrase it from my point of view, because it's important for the whole kind of topic we're dealing with. The first one, I think, is a growing securitization and geopoliticization of the whole region. What does it mean? I think from a Western angle, the Baltic Sea region is one where we have increasingly a sort of security consumption. So the deployments of NATO forces, the new efforts to increase armaments production, all the attempts about which we have been talking today. But at the same time, it's also a region of security production. And particularly the Baltic states, with their kind of limited capabilities, in some areas, they are, of course, front runners and security producer, notwithstanding, of course, Poland as the huge bulwark on the eastern flank. I think in this debate about securitization, the notion or the understanding of security has always been broad. So I grew up in my academic socialization with this sort of extended definition of what security means. And I think this is something which now returns in Germany, particularly now in the Baltic states. I think it was always in the last 3 decades very kind of encompassing. Remember the sentence, I think it was a former Estonian defense minister said, looking at issues like mnemotic conflicts, history has to be defended. It's not just something in the background. It has a hard security angle. And geopoliticization, the strategic fault lines are projecting into the region, which means that especially the eastern part of the Baltic Sea region is not anymore what it was supposed to be in the 1990s, a sort of interface between the West, which set to enlarge, and a new Russia. Now, this is has something to do with the second overarching tendency, Europeanization and Westernization with simultaneous decoupling. So, of course, we had the enlargements of EU and NATO. We had elements of growing cooperation, of growing convergence among the EU and NATO countries in the region, and at the same time, separation and conflict with Russia. So the Baltic defense line, which is being built, or the Polish Tarczah Wschód, the Eastern Shield, these are also elements of this sort of decoupling and delimitation from Russia. And the third tendency, of course, the Baltic Sea region has been an area of growth, interdependence, and cooperation. So Baltic Sea region is an economic powerhouse, especially Nordic Baltic countries and Poland. Germany has a little bit problems at the moment. And that means that trade, logistics, supply chains, exchange of commodities have highly intensified, that infrastructures, especially the critical infrastructures, have a new relevance, and that, of course, something like energy is at the core of what is going on in the region. Poland's Prime Minister Tusk, I think a week ago, he announced a new program, which is called the Polish Sea, Polskie Morze, where he said the Baltic Sea region is key for economic development, particularly when it comes to energy. So Poland wants to build offshore wind parks. Poland has the before mentioned Baltic pipeline infrastructure. It has the big LNG terminal in Świnoujście, and the Polish nuclear power plant. The first one is going to be built quite close to the coastline. Everything has to be protected. So, bringing this together, I would say, and that's our general background, the Baltic Sea is a sea of connectivity, is a sea of vulnerability, and a sea of geopolitical tension. Not only the sea, but also the area in a broader sense. Now on Germany, which is a Baltic Sea littoral state. I personally come from the very south of Germany, so I don't have a Baltic Sea Hanse identity, but of course I would dare to say that Germany now is increasingly discovering or rediscovering this region. So not only the federal states like Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Schleswig-Holstein or Hamburg, but also Germany in toto. Now, you asked for the Zeitenwende. What is Zeitenwende, this broad notion? I think Zeitenwende means, in a very general sense, a transformation of the German security and defense posture in a comprehensive sense. And that means it has different layers or spheres. I posit that we have a Zeitenwende of different speeds. This multi-speed Zeitenwende means that if you look at the particular domains, you see quite different momentum. So, and in a way, it comes as a surprise that what is always a problem in every country, particularly in Germany, where we have a strong tradition of fiscal conservatism, money and defense spending is not the toughest restraint. We saw it more recently with the new German government when even the Christian Democratic parties and the Christian Democratic Chancellor, who is traditionally a standard bearer of solid finances, said, we are ready now in this situation to create a new financial package for infrastructures, which also have a sort of dual use side, but also we are ready to loosen the budget rules. So this is the kind of inner circle, just like the modernization, the strengthening of the armed forces of the Bundeswehr. Then we have this sort of economic stuff, particularly energy. So there was a nice notion, it was called Deutschland Tempo, so the German speed. We're not so good at doing big infrastructure projects usually, but the diversification away from Russia, the building of new LNG terminals really happened rapidly. So we could do a fundamental shift in very short time. But what comes after that in the outer circles is much more, that we have much more inertia. That's kind of the civilian dimension, and of course the change of the society, of the mindset, and of the strategic culture. And I would say, if you look at the fate of Zeitenwende, what is indeed critical is this kind of the posture, the attitude of society. And I think there are kind of two, in a way, rivaling elements which you also had when you looked at the political discourse since the beginning of the full-fledged invasion. I would say it. I would phrase it in terms of cardinal virtues. So it was on the one hand Sophrosyne, so temperance, Besonnenheit. Yeah, that was what the Chancellor particularly said. We have to be very cautious. Yeah? Otherwise, our support for Ukraine might be very risky. And at the same time, Andrea, courage. Oh, yeah, that's Sorios and others, in a way. So, and I think for every German government, it will be important to reconcile both elements, because particularly this kind of temperance attitude is very strong, anchored in the German society. Why? I think we have something that's part, I think, of many attempts to compare Baltic states, Germany, or the countries in the region. We have a sort of very diverse topography of fear in the region. So I once said, at least before Russia started its invasion, Germans are afraid of everything, this German angst, apart from Russia. Russia was, for a very long time, for a majority in Germany, seen as a partner. And that was just the other way around, for example, with Poland or the Baltic states. So Poles are afraid of nothing, Balts are afraid of nothing, but they always had this sort of, maybe not fear, but kind of focus on sensitivity on Russia. So we have this German angst. And I would say it's not, if you look at Russia and the German threat perception, for substantial segments in German society, it's not so much the fear of Russia invading Germany, but it's an indirect fear that the war might escalate if we are too active in supporting Ukraine, because the Russians are threatening, and then the Iskanders will come to Berlin. So angst is one element in the equation, and then of course the political socialization after the Second World War, with Germany being a civilian power, a Handelsstaat, that's deeply ingrained in the kind of collective collective memory. Just kind of as anecdotal for me, I had a symbolic kind of, so it's symbolically, a couple of years ago, it was before the war, I read an article in German newspapers about the MLC signs, military load class signs on bridges. These were the veterans who still know the Cold War know it, kind of, at least in Germany, you had these orange signs on bridges, which showed you what the maximal weight of vehicles is, which can pass the bridges, so military vehicles. And in this article, they described that at that time, the authorities thought that this is anachronistic. We don't need it anymore, but it's too expensive to remove them, so they will just be removed if a bridge is refurbished. So that was a symbolic indication of where we stood at that time. This has, of course, changed now, and maybe kind of the last element or two elements I would point out at what is deeply kind of part of the German mindset, which is in the defensive, but which might come back in the future. We had a very strong peace movement in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, interestingly, the most vital, one of the most vital forces was the Green Party, or the Green Party came out of this movement, and they are now on the other side. They have kind of changed a little bit, but we might think about scenarios where such a peace movement might return. Interestingly, of course, there was a frontline awareness in the old kind of federal republic. Germany was a frontline state, and we had defense expenditures, defense spending of more than 3% in certain periods. I doubt that we will come back to that kind of awareness. And then, of course, finally we have the East-West divide, and it would be a simplification to say the East is in a way pro-Russian, but because you also, I think, you have in the deep soul of parts of the old Western German society, there are some kind of sentiments on Russia, but in Eastern Germany, it's a very kind of tough element with which everyone has to take into account. So to take it together and to finish here, I would say what we have taken account of what has happened so far. We had a strong political leadership. It's interesting that the Minister of Defense, Mr. Pistorius, who is a kind of driver of Zeitenwende, is a social democrat. Some say it has to be a social democrat to do this process of transformation, but that he is the most popular German politician. Yeah. So even though he has used words like kriegstüchtig, ready for war, which is not very, very popular. So I think that will be the key challenge to maintain this strong leadership with a society which for the time being has, I would be very cautious to say, has a sort of permissive consensus on what has been done so far. Hybrid attacks and everything what is related to that for a long time have not been kind of on the radar screen in the broader debate. Even interferences, attacks like the Tiergarten murder, that was seen rather as a nuisance, a disturbance, which was considered as something which should not harm the stability of relations with Russia. Now this has changed, and interestingly, I think the wake-up call in this realm for Germany were the explosions in the Nord Stream system, whoever caused them. Now finally, to conclude, and what could be done better and we have a kind of Baltic Sea region debate between Tallinn and Berlin, and including also kind of external actors which are insiders like the UK, which is, for example, involved in the Joint Expeditionary Force and other projects. I will just throw out three thoughts. The first one, and we heard in our first panel, kind of inspiring thoughts about what resilience is and what it might mean. I'm very traditional, and I'm a fan of this kind of old definition of 4 components of resilience, the 4 R's. So resilience entails redundancy, robustness, but also, as it is nicely called, resourcefulness and rapidity. The first 2 elements being rather the preventive arm, and the second 2 elements being the compensatory arm. I think we're kind of now on a good way when it comes to all these robustness, redundancy issues. But we should bear in mind that that attacks will happen and that damage will happen and that we will have to be able to create compensatory capabilities. For example, repair ships. We need more of these repair ships. Otherwise, we cannot restore the capabilities and capacities we had. Second, I would be rather cautious about transferring models which work quite well in particular societies like in Finland or the Baltic states, so this kind of comprehensive total defense system, to a country like Germany. So Germany is a big tanker. It's a multi-level system. We have the Länder and so on and so forth. So I think this could use as an inspiration, but we will not be able to do copy and paste. But what we should do is to take advantage of this kind of multi-level system. So civil protection is of course something where the regions, where the municipalities come in, where actors like ports come in. So I think there should be new networks of ports, of municipalities, and some of these networks already exist, but they do culture and other stuff, which really focus on security and on civil protection. And the third thought, I think there is an ongoing regionalization of security. Do we need regional security clauses or solidarity commitments? Some of us have done research or have for long years observed the Council on the Baltic Sea States. It was a rather marginal institution, and it is now looking for a new mission. There were 2 wise men tasked with doing a report, which was released a couple of days ago, Landsbergis and Ilves. And their conception of a new CBSS, of course without Russia, they're in Belarus, they're not members anymore, Russia is not member anymore, would be to have a sort of early response, and for example to create institutions which focus on civil protection particularly. So I think something like a forum for civil protection and preparedness in the framework of a relaunched CBSS might be an idea. The other elements are more kind of demanding, and we should reflect the implications. Poland has signed a treaty with France recently, where you have these sort of mutual security clauses. Poland has signed a treaty in November, I think, with Sweden when Prime Minister Tusk took part in the Nordic-Baltic 8 summit for the first time. Is this good, or is this undermining the cohesion of NATO because we're creating different zones of solidarity? Germany has its engagement in Lithuania particularly, and the brigade. Do we also need a sort of special clause of cooperation? I once proposed a German-Lithuanian security partnership, but what does this mean for example, for Latvia and Estonia? So apologies for having been much too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lang. I really like it when speakers finish off with questions, because this gives us food for thought for potential future conferences. So, but also thank you very much for really elaborating in depth what is going on in Germany. I would have probably 4 or 5 follow-up questions, but I know that the audience is also waiting to pose some questions. I know we have a final speaker, Dr. Vdovychenko, and...
How many minutes do I have?
10?
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll then just collect questions that we have. And I find it really great that we also have a representative of Ukraine here, a Ukrainian, and I think we can just say that we respectful and unbelievably astonished by the resilience that the Ukrainian society as a whole has really shown, not only after the large-scale invasion, but already after what happened in 2014, the annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine. And I wrote my PhD on Ukraine, and I found it just always so fascinating to discover something more and be inspired by what was going on in Ukraine. Of course, the context was always an unfortunate, unhappy one, but what happened in Ukraine with the society, how society was transforming from 2014 onwards, this was really inspiring, and I had so many lessons learned for not only the countries that I represent, but also for my own life and my own doing. But now, looking at the societal level, Dr. Vdovychenko, what would you say, what are the key lessons learned from the Russian large-scale invasion of Ukraine for civil preparedness and defense? And can then, and how can these be applied to other countries? If you could give us a few examples.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I can say that I have a linkage to Baltic region. First of all, I'm alumna of Estonian School of Diplomacy, and we were just talking 2007, the Bronze Soldier and the cyber attack that happened in Estonia, something that I witnessed when I was studying and then working actually in Estonia. So very much into in the region and deep respect. Till the moment when you didn't shut the Russian flights entering the Estonian airspace. Till that moment, there are still doubts. Lesson number one, and I know that I'm really limited on time, and I'll try to be really sharp. Since I would say when everyone asks me, especially from the journalists, so why you are so resilient, I say we have trained more than 900 years to do that. You know, that's the lesson. So it's not only even 2014, but actually it's much earlier in this sense, and specifically the Soviet times gave us the momentum, how the composition of Ukrainian society heterogeneously never relied on the institution, what we say the vertical frame, right? So therefore, the composing and the idea of commuting and at the same time communities building and driven by the community is something in our heart. Never explored before academically, that's absolutely true, but it doesn't mean it didn't exist. So it's a lesson number one. Lesson number two, since 2014, I'm here using my colleagues from cyber domain. They are brilliant because they actually describe it in two words, what happened in 2014 and how we were slightly not prepared, but also prepared to some extent to 2022. Advanced persistent threat, that's how the cyber experts are using. So it means it's a kind of technological preparation to the cyber attack which is happening. It's very hard to detect when it's happening, but then you're literally, then there is a time that you're reflecting and then take the lessons learned and basically analyze, adapt, right? We operate now under advanced, potentially constant threat. So it means it never stops. This threat is never stopping. That's a lesson number one from us. And specifically, domains that absolutely correctly were saying were educational institutions. Since 2024, the targets are educational institutions, since the kindergarten, to be precisely. We have the data here from my colleagues, in particular, 4,300 cyber attacks only last year. In comparison, for example, with Europe, 600 recorded cyber attacks recorded, because they're also unrecorded. That's very important to understand. In the United States, 450 hybrid attacks. In Asia, only 700. So it means the majority, 46% of all of the cyber attacks are happening towards Ukrainian institutions, and of course, Ukrainian people in this sense. So advanced constant threat, this is something as we, as an environment, are living. I have here also the lessons, not only from the territorial defense unit, something that what we say we united much more after the full-scale invasion, but even before that, and how much we were training and specifically how critical they were in the liberation of Kyiv region, but also some other regions, how they are ensuring now and allowing the regular armed forces of Ukraine to concentrate on the most threatening directions. And now they are, of course, doing something which is in addition to the infantry and mechanized units, aerial reconnaissance teams. But I will slightly skip to the moment in understanding what are the lessons learned in 2025 from us, because that's something I think important, taking into account, and I'm quoting for the first time your Chancellor, who 48 minutes ago, he was saying, there are no currently indication that this war will end soon, period. It means that we are under advanced constant threat, and Germany understands that, finally, I think. In this sense, it's important that the lessons, not only on how the hybrid attacks are happening, because they are happening, and we talked in the previous panels, not only on the cables, but basically the components from China, for example, in different angles, and we didn't touch upon that, and that's also very sensitive data collection for the Chinese, and not only. But we also have to say how much data is the new battlefield or battleground. And that's my second lesson learned from Ukraine. Algorithms decide who you see what, as it is in especially in the elections now, polls and happening not only in Poland, but Romania, but also in Portugal. In the hybrid warfare, that power shapes entire nations in such a way that this trend will continue. And this is one of our lessons learned. So environment is shifting as well as the data within the new battlefield is. The transformation we've seen, and this is the lesson number 3, we should rely, of course, and build much more sharp partnerships. I think our survival mode formula, we understand that there is no guarantee given. We like some people forget about the Budapest Memorandum. We understand that we take that into consideration under international law, but we are building our mindset in understanding there is not such a guarantee. What are we going to do? Should we stand alone? We will not survive. So, of course, the partnerships, not only within EU allies, but specifically European allies of NATO, this is something that we are building on. The arrangements, definitely. Here we are happy to share. We become the bearers of competencies and creators of innovation. We are the battlefield, and we are the lab for the innovations for that. So counter-battery warfare, army of drones, digital mobilizations, adaptive logistics, this is something that we are already sharing with many of the governments, the representatives of this room. And it's not the end. Even our Ministry of Defense is, within the signing of a memorandum of understanding of each and everyone who is interested, is happy to do that. So this is our lesson learned. Please learn from us, not from our blood, but because of our blood, and of course of our persistence and really high morale. Basically, this is because the drone warfare is the 21st century warfare. And we are the only one for a moment in a such large scale who definitely know how to be agile and adaptive. So this is something that we definitely have to share. Lesson number 4, specifically because we haven't touched upon much of the Black Sea, but we should. And of course, it's not still from Tallinn to Berlin, but I think zigzagging sometimes helps to understand different theaters. The maritime activity of the Black Sea neighbors also continues as usual. The price cap, we've seen, of course, the sanctions on the shadow fleet, only up to 200 tankers out of 1,000. So our next step is the same as the message. Build those sanctions on the shadow fleet better and on a large scale. Large scale, lesson number 5. I'm always making an example, Armani or Gucci. This is how the missile systems from the Western societies are being transported to Ukraine. We do need them, but in order to have a large scale advantage, we need a mass scale Mark & Spencer producer. I hope, oh yeah, I'll be quoted, okay. The thing is just, when the things like that happening, it's important to understand that the mass and the quality should come together. This is lesson number 6. The quality is provided from the battlefield of Ukraine, because we do have the terabytes of the data that we are happy to share, as well as the skill sets of our engineers. So Danish model, Dutch model should be extended. This is something that, of course, one of the lessons learned and the masses that we get growing into. Last but not least, don't think about disinformation. Think about the foreign malign interference constantly happening on your territories, because that's basically what happens, not only from the adversaries from Russia, but also from China and some other countries potentially. So that's something that we learned in an idea. Lessons learned from other countries who haven't been mentioned before. I was happy to read today in Latvia, there is a Scheme Maritime Test Range has been established to test drone systems, building from the Black Sea Maguras drones systems themselves. It's already happening. Please scale up and use it in other contexts. There is one more, but very important in extending or making the large-scale production, and that's basically true not only for the UK, but also many of the EU member states. Bureaucracy versus efficiency. Unfortunately, to do the procurement, we know how much of the bottlenecks there are. And I'm happy to actually maybe stop here, but at the same time invite you to read some of the papers under the Future of Ukraine program that we did specifically on this lesson. Last but not least, people claim there are no resources. We say they are. And actually yesterday we published, on the request of the House of Commons, the report, how exactly to seize the Russian assets, both state and private. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you very nicely for this very structured and concise, but not less informative and important take. You rightly said you have been learning for the past 900 years, and this very nicely relates to what Dr. Adomėnas said. Well, it's a marathon. You have been running this marathon for the past 900 years, so I guess there's a lot we can learn from Ukraine, from Ukrainians, from their experience historically. And it's just nice that at this point, the perception is aligning in, let's say, Western Europe to a large extent, as well as in parts, in the second part of Europe, that is Central Eastern Europe. Now, without further ado, I know we don't have that much time anymore for questions, and I would probably have, for each speaker, 3 or 4 questions, but I don't want to take the show here for myself. I want to give the floor, the space also for our participants. Are there any questions so far? Yes, in the very back.
Yes, thank you, Donatas Kupčiūnas. So my question is simple. Is this whole Zeitenwende a scam? In a sense that it's a sort of German response to this very unpleasant campaign of naming and shaming as a result of the war in Ukraine. Because what people were saying is, you're kind of kitties. You should go back to your, old ways, being sort of strong militarily and not just a civilian power. Ukraine needs help and so on. And that way, Germany got drawn into saying things that it didn't really want to say, but they had to say it. Because, if a critic would look at that from the point of view of geopolitics, and geopolitics essentially is about you doing things based on where you are, essentially your position on the map conditioning what you do. And in this case, German interests are completely opposite to the American neocon interests. German interest is essentially not to get drawn into places and things that Americans might draw them into. And on the other hand, the Germans would never fight the Chinese for the Americans, for instance, or some critics would say even the Russians for the Balts. So, some might say that it's completely irrational. This whole talk of Zeitenwende is completely irrational and completely anti-geopolitical, because it's everything that Germany would not be supposed to do in a rational world, because the threat of Russia for Germany is exactly nil. Russia would, I don't even know if there is anyone in Germany who thinks that Russia would invade, Germany or something like that. On the other hand, Germany lost cheap energy from Russia. And this makes it less competitive vis-a-vis the Americans and vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And you also have problems with internal politics because of that. So I'm pulling your leg a little bit. Maybe the Germans could chip in, but what would you say to a claim, how would you respond to the claim that this whole Zeitenwende is either a scam or completely irrational thing to do? Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Alexander again from master student at LSE. My question is sort of really regarding Ukraine's sort of special operations forces and its links to sort of militia in the eastern territories. And I mean, that's something that where you ended up in the early stages of the war having independent militia acting independently and then throughout conducting irregular warfare operations. And then we've seen this sort of transition towards it being more directly aligned with official special operations forces in sort of targeting their activities and being sort of more strategic, being a part of a broader operational campaign. My question is sort of going back to the sort of Lithuanian context as well. How do we can say, well, we'll take lessons, but how many of these lessons are applicable or can be taken from the Ukrainian context versus, how much do we say, okay, this is happening in this context, in this war, that might not be applicable in our context, in the way that we set things up. I'm not sure if that's particularly clear.
Mm-hmm. So we have 2 questions. The first one, I would guess, addressed to you, Dr. Lang, about the Zeitenwende and the challenge to the Zeitenwende.
In a way, what you described is the American way. So why should the US do something for Central Eastern Europe or for Eastern Europe? They are far away, geography. If you say geography plays a high role. A sort of agreement with Russia, which could open up economic channels, is okay, is good. And that's, at least in some scenarios, what is going on at the moment. I would be a bit more reluctant to describe, to take a geographic determinism as the source and the guidelines of geopolitics. So, of course, Germany is in a learning process because the whole concept of geopolitics was for the Federal Republic a no-go. Yeah, I mean, it led to the catastrophes of the 20th century. That was the kind of mainstream post-World War II German assessment. So we wanted to get rid of our own thinking of international relations, and we were looking for a sort of post-national and post-spatial approach to international affairs. And I think the moment where things began to change, so were in 2004 in a way, when you saw in Germany that during the Orange Revolution, for the first time, this concept of, as it was called, integration competition between the EU at that time and Russia also was about the control of space, the control of territory in a way. And the EU continued to kind of avoid it, Germany also, but that was sort of the first impulse. And now Germany kind of was thrown into this role. But it didn't look at it only in terms of space and territory, because we also have a European interest based on values. So, of course, 100, 200 years ago, with Prussia or another Germany, the dynamics of the conflict would be different. So the guiding lines of the old diplomacy of the concert would have been, as it was called, convenience and compensation. So, of course, if you want to get a part of Ukraine, we want to get another kind of territorial, we have another territorial claim, and the great powers would have kind of accommodated with Russia. This did not happen. Of course, I do not deny that there are some forces, also in Germany, which would have gone for for that option, but it's still, it is marginal, it will continue to be marginal. And also, if you look at some key moments and decisions, the Lithuanian brigade, there was a sort of discussion between Lithuania and Germany if it is possible to have a permanent or a kind of permanent rotational presence. And at the end, the minister himself, in a way, did the decision for what Lithuania expected us to do, because the brigade in Lithuania is seen as a flagship project of Zeitenwende, because Zeitenwende has this strong external dimension. So I think if your kind of assessment is right, we would not have the output we have so far. The thing which we should look at is what happens in a post-war period, whenever this will happen. Yeah, if there might not be a sort of yearning for normalcy in parts of German society, in parts of the political class and the political establishment. For example, if the Americans cancel sanctions and do businesses with the Russians, why should we not do it? Yeah, so, but that's something I think for the future. So I would not be as pessimistic as you are, obviously.
And a final question about Ukraine context.
Well, absolutely true that not all of the lessons learned from Ukrainian context will be used, but it was your Prime Minister actually earlier this month who already integrates into the security protocols the lessons learned. They are working now in the joint working group within our MOD, means Ukrainian Minister of Defense, but not only Minister of Defense, because we are talking about broader scale. Specifically for the Strategic Defense Review, as you know, it's going to be published, for these things. So definitely something that we are happy to share. But on a different scale is just, I think this alert state or alarm, kind of the idea or momentum that it can come, it was something that the previous panel was absolutely brilliantly elaborating. I believe that's something that what I call advanced constant threat is if you take it as a baseline for all of the things that you are doing, even domestically, as we say, right, or at house, I think it would be not something necessary. For example, I asked some of the colleagues, not in this country, but in a different country, are you doing a paramedic training? Are you doing some digital or cybersecurity training? So it's a really, really basic component, but it's necessary, right? As I told you, it's going to be late when the moment will come. So learn from us on this idea, because the stolen data, stolen personalities and ID is a new normality at the moment. And that's why I'm saying that the battlefield, the mind is going to be the new also battlefield for many.
Thank you very much. We already ran over time. Is there maybe a final question? I'm happy to give up a few minutes of my concluding remarks, but if not so, then I had 5 minutes, but I will just say literally 1 or 2 minutes. A big thank you to everyone. A big thank you for all the great questions that have been posed. A big thank you for all the participants that really shed light on an unbelievably important topic. And I think if there's one keyword I would like to take away with me, it's dynamism. Kai-Olaf, you mentioned how dynamic those countries have become. The Baltic States countries, Poland, but also Ukraine, when we are thinking about the economy, startup sectors. But the dynamism also in face of the constant threat. It's a dynamic threat that is changing. It is evolving. And that is why we need to learn from each other, dynamically learn from each other, of how to counter this threat. Because if there's one thing I deeply believe in, and also we as a foundation believe in, then it is that we as Europeans, and I deliberately say Europeans, meaning also the Brits, we have a common destiny. We have a joint future. We are sitting in the same boat. We need to find joint answers. Of course, there might be national specificities on how to embrace those answers. But the joint mission is clear. we need to become more resilient, because the more resilient we are, the more of a deterrent we are together, the less our adversary or our adversaries will be willing to do us harm. And the less they will do us harm, the better we will be in the future. We are sitting in the same boat, and maybe to now conclude with my anecdote at the beginning of the pens. We thought in the beginning maybe Russia's giving us pens, but actually they're throwing grenades at our boat and must make this boat bulletproof. And I think this whole conference series we are having with the Center for Geopolitics, I took over 5 months ago as the UK country director. We are looking back at more than 4 years of joint efforts. I really hope that we will make 40 years out of it and make a small step each time towards this joint, hopefully prosperous, hopefully safe future in our common home, Europe. Thank you very much, and looking forward to next time.